Just join on the Twitch. Alright. I guess we can get started now. Is my... well... And we are live. Hello and welcome to the stream. My name is Nathan. I'm a manga translator YouTuber who is currently not translating a manga because, well, we are about to read a book. Welcome back. This is the fourth episode of our ASMR book club. I usually put the ASMR book club at the end of each of my stream, but I wanted to test something. Do you guys notice anything different? So let me give you guys a hint. Put on your headphones right now. Okay? Have you guys put on your headphones? Now, notice anything different with my audio? Okay, how about now? Do you guys notice anything different? Let me try it one more time. Hey, how's it going? How's it going, chat? Hello. Yeah, so I got a little bit of an upgrade with my ASMR stuff. Is that I added some binaural plugins to my VST. It's just a VST plugin called Anaclip, where it basically does a little bit of stereo panning on my microphone because apparently this microphone that I'm using right now is doesn't have panning inside the OBS, so I had to use a VST plugin so I could get all the surround sound. I tested last night and it worked perfectly. It worked fine. Although I'm not sure how the quality is when it comes to the streaming. So let me try and test that. Gonna turn off the music so I can actually hear the thing. Okay. Oh, and I should probably put it on stereo. Okay, so how about this? Okay, so I guess because for my hearing it's only up on the one side of microphone, so I'm not sure. Yeah, this way it'll be like a lot more subdued, but I can still like getting this much closer to your ears, and it will say much more clear on one side. Although, hold on, let me try to turn that off. So how do you guys think? How about this? Check, check. I am trying to whisper it on your left ear right now. Okay, so I guess this is way much better. How about I try to get a little bit more farther. I'm getting way more farther. Hey guys, where you going? Come back. Come back, chat. Come back. No. Alright, I'm gonna step in closer to you, up in front. And I am right up to your nose. And now I am in the center of your head. I am in your mind right now. And just that voice at the back of your head. Yeah, how does it feel? How does it feel? Yeah, pretty cool, right? It's so cool. So yeah, we got some new things for our ASMR uh, book club. So, how is everyone doing tonight? I hope you are doing well, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you. It is now Monday at 9 13 p.m. I really wanted to do a stream for the past couple of weeks, but we just had the baby shower of my recently born nephew at my house. So every relative came to visit. Okay, this is actually getting a little bit distracted. So I'm gonna put the audio so I can actually monitor it. I'm gonna turn on the monitor. Yeah. So where were we? I got a lot of relative coming from a bunch of places from my side of the family to my brother-in-law's side of the family, and it's been fun. I wish I could show you the decoration that we had for the baby shower. It is also sort of served as the well, this is very low. Hold on, let me increase the volume. It is also the naming ceremony for my nephew. It's just the time where we reveal the name of my nephew. You remember when I called him Olgo? It's short for algorithm. His first real name is actually Altair. Yes, the fact that he has the same name as the character from Assassin's Creed did not go past us. Yeah, So we did uh One Piece anime theme baby shower, although somewhere around the line the theme got mixed because my brother sort of forgot his One Piece ship model figure. He had both the Going Merry and Thousand Sunny sit at his house, and he forgot to bring it for the baby shower. Meanwhile, all I got around at my house is just a figure of Nico Robin, and it is pretty inappropriate for the baby shower. And the other thing that I got is the only anime decoration that I have is the Spy X Family anime figure, and then my collection of the Dragon Ball replica. So it's all mismatch of different animes all together. I really wanted to show you guys the freaking photos of the decoration, but it's so the name of my nephew was actually right there in the background, so I cannot dox him. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. By the way, how are you guys liking this new panning thing? Let me actually hear it. Okay, so it stays the same. I hope you guys are listening this using your actual headphone. So yeah, the actual baby shower was I believe it was Saturday, and during the during that week we had a bunch of relatives coming and prepare for the baby shower. My parents are so traditional, they did not rely on catering, so the only catering that we have is just basically my aunts and grandmothers working in the kitchen. And yeah, I basically became pretty much their gopher for my aunts and grandmothers, as well as my sister-in-law, who is staying over. Actually, she is still staying over. She's like downstairs right now, sleeping with my nephew. Uh, yeah, which is really suck for her because our house does not have air conditioning, and alcohol has been it gets really stuffy in this house. Even even I have to sleep with my electric fan, and I cannot use it right now because it will disturb the ASMR stream. Okay, so what else that has been going on? There's not pretty much an update on the manga decks thing. Speaking of manga decks, my translation of Corseltal no Ryujutsushi Koryu Monogatari chapter 54, I believe, it's now available on my Patreon. Alright. Anyway. So yeah. Basically, so for tonight's ASMR stream, I'm just going to test on the panning thing. Yeah, so I'm just going to test the panning thing. So every couple of pages, like every 1 pages, I will switch the position of the audio panning. I hope it will make get the stream ASMR stream a lot more engaging. The way that I do this is that just I use a VST plugin for my microphone instead of using two microphone. I'm just using a single microphone and just manually panning it. I tried getting it to the panning to be automatic using OBS filter, but unfortunately it just does not work with VST plugins. So if anyone knows how to get binaural audio on OBS without relying on VST plugins, please let me know. Or if there is a binaural plugin for OBS, that would be pretty much helpful. Alright, where's the book? Oh, it is right behind me. Alright, so let the magic show begins. Wait, is it? Hold on, how do I get the glasses again? Place your right hand to your left chest, take the index finger horizontally. Oh, just the index finger, okay. Wait, it is right hand, right? Place your right hand on your left chest and stick out the index finger. Oh, that's it. I forgot to turn the props on. Studio prop, help prop, Stratocaster, stage props, but wait, where the frig is my glasses? Facebook glasses, there we go. Is it already? Oh, it is already. And then the book. Ta-da! Alright. Here we go. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. A counterintuitive approach to living a good life. Copyright by Mark Manson. First, Harper One hardcover published in 2006. Oh yeah, I forgot, because of the fact that the book got really wet last week. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of just that. It is very stiff. I think tonight we're gonna read 2 chapters for tonight. Yeah, because of the time. Alright, here. Oh, almost forgot to put on my Vaseline. Always keep your lips moist when you're doing a book reading. Okay. Chapter 4. The Value of Suffering. In the closing months of 1990, already freaked that up. In the closing months of 1944, after almost a decade of war, the tide was turning against Japan. Their economy was floundering, their military overstretched across half of Asia, and the territories they had won throughout the Pacific were now toppling like dominoes to the US forces. Defeat seems inevitable. On December 26, 1944, Second Lieutenant Hiro Onoda of the Japanese Imperial Army was deployed to the small island of Lubang in the Philippines. His orders were to slow the United States' progress as much as possible, to stand and fight at all costs, and never surrender. Both he and his comrade knew it was essentially a suicide mission. In February 1945, the Americans arrived on Lubang and took the island with overwhelming force. Within days, most of the Japanese soldiers had either surrendered or been killed, but Onoda and three of his men managed to hide in the jungle. From there, they began a guerrilla warfare campaign against the US forces and the local population, attacking supply lines, shooting at stray soldiers, and interfering with the American forces in any way that they could. That August, half a year later, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered, and the deadliest war in human history came into its dramatic conclusion. However, thousands of Japanese soldiers were still scattered among the Pacific Isles, and most, like Onoda, were hiding in the jungle, unaware that the war was over. These holdouts continued to fight and pillage as they had before. This was a real problem for rebuilding Eastern Asia after the war, and the government agreed something must be done. The US military, in conjunction with the Japanese government, dropped thousands of leaflets throughout the Pacific region announcing that the war was over and it was time for everyone to go home. Onoda and his men, like many others, found and read these leaflets, but unlike most of the others, Onoda decided that they were fake, a trap set by the American forces to get the guerrilla fighters to show themselves. Onoda burned the leaflets, and he and his men stayed hidden and continued to fight. 5 years went by, the leaflets had stopped, and most of the American forces had long since gone home. The local population on Lubang attempted to return to their normal lives of farming and fishing, yet there were Hiro Onoda and his merry men, still shooting at the farmers, burning their crops, stealing their livestock, and murdering locals who wandered too far into the jungle. The Philippine government then took to drawing up new flyers and spreading them out across the jungle. "Come out," they said. "The war is over. You lost." But these too were ignored. In 1952, the Japanese government made one final effort to draw the last remaining soldiers out of hiding throughout the Pacific. This time, letters and pictures from the missing soldiers' family were airdropped, along with a personal note from the emperor himself. Once again, Onoda refused to believe that the information was real. Once again, he believed the airdrop to be a trick by the Americans. Once again, he and his men stood and continued to fight. Another few years went by, and the Philippine locals, sick of being terrorized, finally armed themselves and began firing back. By 1959, one of Onoda's companions had surrendered and another had been killed. Then, a decade later, Onoda's last companion, a man named Kozuka, was killed in a shootout with the local police while he was burning rice field, still waging war against the local population a full quarter century after the end of World War II. Onoda, having now spent more than half of his life in the jungles of Lubang, was all alone. In 1972, the news of Kozuka's death reached Japan and caused a stir. The Japanese people thought the last of the soldiers from the war had come home years earlier. The Japanese media began to wonder, if Kozuka had still been on Lubang until 1972, then perhaps Onoda himself, the last known Japanese holdout from the World War II, might still be alive as well. That year, both the Japanese and Philippine governments sent search parties to look for the enigmatic second lieutenant, now part myth, part hero, and part ghost. They found nothing. As the month progressed, the story of Lieutenant Oda morphed into something of an urban legend in Japan. The war hero who sounded too insane to actually exist. Many romanticized him, others criticized him. Others thought he was the stuff of fairy tale invented by those who still wanted to believe in a Japan that had disappeared long ago. It was around this time that a young man named Norio Suzuki first heard of Onoda. Suzuki was an adventurer, an explorer, and a bit of a hippie. Born after the war ended, he had dropped out of school and spent 4 years hitchhiking his way across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, sleeping on park benches, in strangers' cars, in jail cells, and under the stars. He volunteered on farms for food and donated blood to pay for places to stay. He was a free spirit and perhaps a little bit nuts. In 1972, Suzuki needed another adventure. He had returned to Japan after his travels and found the strict cultural norms and social hierarchy to be stifling. He hated school. He couldn't hold down a job. He wanted to be back on the road, back on his own again. For Suzuki, the legend of hero Onoda came as the answers to his problems. It was a new and worthy adventure for him to pursue. Suzuki believed that would be the one who would found Onoda. Sure, search parties conducted by the Japanese, Philippine, and American governments had not been able to find Onoda. Local police forces had been scavenging the jungle for almost 30 years with no luck. Thousands of leaflets had met with no response, but fuck it. This deadbeat college dropout hippie was going to be the one to find him. Unarmed and untrained for any sort of reconnaissance or tactical warfare, Suzuki traveled to Lubang and began wandering around the jungle all by himself. His strategy? Scream Onoda's name really loudly and tell him that the emperor was worried about him. He found Onoda in 4 days. Suzuki stayed with Onoda in the jungle for some time. Onoda had been alone by that point for over a year, and once found by Suzuki, he welcomed the companionship and was desperate to learn what had been happening in the outside world from a Japanese source he could trust. The two men became sorta kind of friends. Suzuki asked Onoda why he had stayed and continued to fight. Onoda said it was simple. He had been given the order to never surrender. So he stayed. For nearly 30 years, he had simply been following an order. Onoda then asked Suzuki why a hippie boy like himself came looking for him. Suzuki said that he had left Japan in search for 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda bear, and the abominable snowman, in that order. The two men had been brought together under the most curious of circumstances. Two well-intentioned adventurers chasing fall visions of glory, like a real-life Japanese Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, stuck together in the damp recess of a Philippine jungle, both imagining themselves heroes, despite both being alone with nothing, doing nothing. Onoda had already by then given up most of his life to a phantom war. Suzuki would give his up too. Having already found hero Onoda and the panda bear, he would die a few years later in the Himalayas, still in search for the abominable snowman. Humans often choose to dedicate large portions of their lives to seemingly useless or destructive causes. On the surface, these causes make no sense. It's hard to imagine how Onoda could have been happy on that island for those 30 years, living off insects and rodents, sleeping in the dirt, murdering civilians decade after decade. Or why Suzuki tracked off at his own death with no money, no companions, and no purpose other than to chase an imaginary Yeti. Yet, later in his life, Onoda said he regretted nothing. He claimed that he was proud of his choices and his time on Lubang. He said that it had been an honor to devote a sizable portion of his life in service to a non-existent empire. Suzuki, had he survived, likely would have said something similar, that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do, that he regretted nothing. These men both chose how they wished to suffer. Hiro Onoda chose to suffer for loyalty to the dead empire. Suzuki chose to suffer for adventure, no matter how ill-advised. To both men, their suffering meant something. It fulfilled some greater cause, and because it meant something, they were able to endure it, or perhaps even enjoy it. If suffering is inevitable, if our problems in life are unavoidable, then the question we could be asking is not, how do I stop suffering? But, why am I suffering? For what purpose? Hiro Onoda returned to Japan in 1974 and became a kind of celebrity in his home country. He was shuttled around from talk show to radio station. Politicians clamored to shake his hand. He published a book and was even offered a large sum of money by the government. But what he found when he returned to Japan horrified him. A consumerist capitalist, superficial culture that had lost all of the traditions of honor and sacrifice upon which his generation had been raised. Onoda tried to use his sudden celebrity to espouse the values of old Japan, but he was stone deaf to this new society. He was seen more as a showpiece than a serious cultural thinker, a Japanese man who had emerged from a time capsule for all to marvel at, like a relic in a museum. And in the irony of ironies, Onoda became far more depressed than he'd ever been in the jungle for all those years. At least in the jungle, his life had stood for something. It had meant something that had made his suffering endurable, indeed even a little bit desirable. But back in Japan, in what he considered to be a vacuous nation full of hippies and loose women in Western clothing, he was confronted with an unavoidable truth, that his fighting had meant nothing. The Japan he had lived and fought for no longer exists, and the weight of his realization pierced him in a way that no bullet ever had. Because his suffering had meant nothing, it suddenly became realized and true. 30 years wasted. And so, in 1980, Onoda packed up and moved to Brazil, where he remained until he died. The self-awareness onion. Self-awareness is like an onion. There are multiple layers to it, and the more you peel them back, the more likely you're going to start crying at inappropriate times. Let's say the first layer of the self-awareness onion is a simple understanding to one's emotion. This is when I'm happy. This is when it makes me feel sad. This gives me hope. Unfortunately, there are many people who suck at even this most basic level of self-awareness. I know because I'm one of them. My wife and I sometimes have a fun back and forth that goes something like this. Her, what's wrong? Me, nothing's wrong, nothing at all. Her, no, something's wrong, tell me. Me, I'm fine, really. Her, Are you sure? You look upset. Me, with nervous laughter. Really? I'm okay, seriously. 30 minutes later, me. And that's why I'm so fucking pissed off. He just acts like as if I don't exist half of the time. We all have emotional blind spots. Often they have to do with the emotions that we were taught were inappropriate growing up. It takes years of practice and effort to get good at identifying blind spots in ourselves and then expressing the affected emotions appropriately. But this task is hugely important and worth the effort. The second layer of the self-awareness onion is an ability to ask why we feel certain emotions. These why questions are difficult and often take months or even years to answer consistently and accurately. Most people need to go to some sort of therapist just to hear this question asked for the first time. Such questions are important because they illuminate what we consider success or failure. Why do you feel angry? Is it because you failed to achieve some goal? Why do you feel lethargic and uninspired? Is it because you don't think you're good enough? This layer of questioning helps us understand the root cause of the emotion that overwhelms us. Once we understand that root cause, we can ideally do something to change it. But there's another, even deeper level of the self-awareness onion. And that one is full of fucking tears. The third level is our personal values. Why do I consider this to be success or failure? How am I choosing to measure myself? By what standard am I judging myself and everyone around me? This level, which takes constant questioning and effort, is incredibly difficult to reach, but it's the most important because our values determine the nature of our problems, and the nature of our problems determines the quality of our lives. Values underlie everything we are and do. If what we value isn't helpful, if what we consider success or failure is poorly chosen, then everything based upon those values, the thoughts, the emotion, the day-to-day feelings, will all be out of whack. Everything we think and feel about a situation ultimately comes back to how valuable we perceive it to be. Most people are horrible at answering these why questions accurately, and this prevents them from achieving a deeper knowledge of their own values. Sure, they may say they value honesty and a true friend, but then they turn around and lie about you behind your back to make themselves feel better. People may perceive that they feel lonely, but when they ask themselves why they feel lonely, they tend to come up with a way to blame others. Everyone else is mean, or no one is cool or smart enough to understand them. And thus, they further avoid their problems instead of seeking to solve it. For many people, this passes as self-awareness, and yet, if they were able to go deeper and look at their underlying values, they would see that their original analysis was based on avoiding responsibility for their own problem, rather than accurately identifying the problem. They would see that the decisions were based on chasing highs, not generating true happiness. Most self-help gurus ignore this deeper level of self-awareness as well. They take people who are miserable because they want to be rich and then give them all sorts of advice on how to make more money, all the while ignoring important values-based questions. Why do they feel such a need to be rich in the first place? How are they choosing to measure success or failure for themselves? Is it not perhaps some particular value that's the root cause of their unhappiness and not the fact that they don't drive a Bentley yet? Much of the advice out there operates at a shallow level of simply trying to make people feel good in the short term, while the real long-term problems never get solved. People's perceptions and feelings may change, but the underlying values and the metrics by which those values are assessed stay the same. This is not real progress. This is just another way to achieve more highs. Take a moment and think of something that's really bugging you. Now ask yourself why it bugs you. Chances are the answer will involve a failure or some sort. Then take that failure and ask why it seems true to you. What if that failure wasn't really a failure? What if you've been looking at it the wrong way? A recent example from my own life. It bugs me that my brother doesn't return my texts or emails. Why? Because it feels like he doesn't give a shit about me. Why does this seem true? Because if he wanted to have a relationship with me, he would take 10 seconds out of his day to interact with me. Why does this lack of relationship with you feel like a failure? Because we're brothers. We're supposed to have good relationships. Two things are operating here. A value that I hold dear and a metric that I use to assess progress toward that value. My value: brothers are supposed to have a good relationship with one another. My metric: being in contact by phone or email. This is how I measure my success as a brother. By holding on to this metric, I make myself feel like a failure, which occasionally ruins my Saturday mornings. We could dig even deeper by repeating the process. Why are brothers supposed to have a good relationships? Because they're family, and family are supposed to be close. Why does that seem true? Because your family is supposed to matter to you more than anyone else. Why does that seem true? Because being close with your family is normal and healthy, and I don't have that. In this exchange, I'm clear about my underlying value, having a good relationship with my brother, but I'm still struggling with my metric. I've given it another name, closeness, but the metric hasn't really changed. I'm still judging myself as a brother based on frequency of contact and comparing myself using that metric against other people I know. Everyone else, or so it seems, has a close relationship with their family members, and I don't. So obviously there must be something wrong with me. But what if I'm choosing a poor metric for myself and my life? What else could be true that I'm not considering? Well, perhaps I don't need to be close to my brother to have that good relationship that I value. Perhaps there just needs to be some mutual respect, which there is. Or maybe mutual trust is what to look for, and it's there. Perhaps these metrics would be better assessments of brotherhood than how many text messages he and I exchange. This clearly makes sense. It feels true for me, but it still fucking hurts that my brother and I aren't close, and there's no positive way to spin it. There's no secret way to glorify myself through this knowledge. Sometimes brothers, even brothers who love each other, don't have close relationships, and that's fine. It is hard to accept at first, but that's fine. What is objectively true about your situation is not as important as how you come to see the situation, how you choose to measure it and value it. Problems may be inevitable, but the meaning of each problem is not. We get to control what our problems mean based on how we choose to think about them, the standard by which we chose to measure them. Rockstar problems. In 1983, a talented young artist was kicked out of his band in the worst possible way. The band had just been signed to a record deal, and they were about to record their first album. But a couple of Days before recording began, the band showed the guitarist the door. No warning, no discussion, no dramatic blowout. They literally woke him up one day by handing him a bus ticket home. As he sat on the bus back to Los Angeles from New York, the guitarist kept asking himself, how did this happen? What did I do wrong? What will I do now? Record contracts didn't exactly fall out of the sky, especially for Ryaskar upstart metal bands. Had he missed his one and only shot? But by the time the bus hits LA, the guitarist had gone over his self-pity and had vowed to start a new band. He decided that this new band would be so successful that his old band would forever regret their decision. He would become so famous that they would be subjected to decades of seeing him on TV, hearing him on the radio, seeing posters of him in the streets and pictures of him in magazines. They'd be flipping burgers somewhere, loading fans from their shitty club gigs, fat and drunk with their ugly wives, and he'd be rocking out in front of the stadium, crowds live on television. He bathed in the tears of his betrayers, each tear wiped dry by a crisp, clean $100 bill. And so the guitarist worked as if possessed by a musical demon. He spent months recruiting the best musicians he could find, far better musicians than his previous bandmates. He wrote dozens of songs and practiced religiously. His seething anger fueled his ambition. Revenge became his muse. Within a couple of years, his new band had signed a record deal of their own, and a year after that, their first record would go gold. The guitarist's name was Dave Mustaine, and the new band he formed was the legendary heavy metal band Megadeth. Megadeth would go on to sell over 25 million albums and tour the world many times over. Today, Mustaine is considered one of the most brilliant and influential musicians in the history of heavy metal music. Unfortunately, the band that he was kicked out of was Metallica, which was sold over 180 million albums worldwide. Metallica is considered by many to be one of the greatest rock bands of all time. And because of this, in rare intimate interview in 2003, a tearful Mustaine admitted that he couldn't help but still consider himself a failure. Despite all that he had accomplished, in his mind, he would always be the guy who got kicked out of Metallica. We're apes. We think we're all sophisticated with our toaster ovens and design footwear, but we're just a bunch of finely ornamented apes. And because we are apes, we instinctually measure ourselves against others and vie for status. The question is not whether we evaluate ourselves against others. Rather, the question is, by what standard do we measure ourselves? Dave Mustaine, whether he realized it or not, chose to measure himself by whether he was more successful and popular than Metallica. The experience of getting thrown out of his former band was so painful for him that he adopted success relative to Metallica as the metric by which to measure himself and his music career. Despite taking a horrible event in his life and making something positive out of it, as Mustaine did with Megadeth, his choice to hold on to Metallica's success as his life-defining metric continued to hurt him decades later. Despite all the money and the fans and the accolades, he still considered himself a failure. Now, you and I may look at Dave Mustaine's situation and laugh. Here's this guy with millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of adoring fans, a career doing the thing he loves best, and still he's getting all weepy-eyed that his rock star buddies from 20 years ago are way more famous than he is. This is because you and I have different values than Mustaine does, and we measure ourselves by different metrics. Our metrics are probably more like, I don't want to work a job that for a boss I hate, or I'd like to earn enough money to send my kid to a good school, or I'd be happy not to wake up in a drainage ditch. And by these metrics, Mustaine is wildly, unimaginably successful. But by his metrics, be more popular and successful than Metallica, he's a failure. Our values determine the metrics by which we measure ourselves and everyone else. Onoda's value of loyalty to the Japanese Empire is what sustained him on Lubang for almost 30 years. But this same value is also what made him miserable upon his return to Japan. Mustaine's metric of being better than Metallica likely helped him launch an incredibly successful music career. But that same metric later tortured him in spite of his success. If you want to change how you see your problems, you have to change what you value and or how you measure your failure or success. As an example, let's look at another musician who got kicked out of another band. His story eerily echoes of that Dave Mustaine, although it happened 2 decades earlier. It was 1962 and there was a buzz around an up-and-coming band from Liverpool, England. This band had funny haircuts and even funnier names, but their music was undeniably good, and the record industry was finally taking notice. There was John, the lead singer and the songwriter, Paul, the boyish-faced romantic bass player, George, the rebellious lead guitar player, and then there was the drummer. He was considered the best looking of the bunch. The girls all went wild for him, and it was his face that began to appear in the magazines first. He was the most professional member of the group too. He didn't do drugs, he had a steady girlfriend. There were even a few people in suits and ties who thought he should be the face of the band, not John or Paul. His name was Pete Best, and in 1962, after landing their first record contract, the other 3 members of the Beatles, The other 3 members of the Beatles quietly got together and asked their manager, Brian Epstein, to fire him. Epstein agonized over the decision. He liked Pete, so he put it off, hoping the other 3 guys would change their minds. Months later, a mere 3 days before the recording of the first record began, Epstein finally called Best to his office. There, the manager unceremoniously told him to piss off and find another band. He gave no reason, no explanation, no condolences, just told him that the other guys wanted him out of the group. So, best of luck. Also, hello Healing, how's it going, buddy? How do you like the new surround system? I am speaking right to your left ear. And now I'm speaking to your right ear. Also, wear your fucking headphones. How's it going, buddy? I am now in the center of your brain. I am now in front of you. Now I am far away. How about this? Yeah, how do you like that? Is your nipple so? No, not gonna say that. Yeah, how's it going, buddy? Also, could you crank up the volume? Yeah, could you crank up the volume? Yeah, it's maybe for the best. Anyway, where were we? Yeah, oh yeah. As a replacement, the man brought some oddball named Ringo Starr. Ringo was older and had a big, funny nose. Ringo agreed to get the same ugly haircut as John, Paul, and George and insisted on writing songs about octopuses and submarines. The other guy said, sure, fuck it, why not? Within 6 months of Best's firing, Beatlemania had erupted, making John, Paul, George, and not Pete, Ringo, arguably four of the most famous faces on the entire planet. Meanwhile, Best understandably fell into the deep depression and spent a lot of time doing what any Englishman will do if you give him a reason to: drink. The rest of the 60s were not kind to Pete Best. In 1965, he had sued two of the Beatles for slander, and all of his other musical projects had failed horribly. In 1968, he attempted suicide, only to be talked out of it by his mother. His life was wrecked. Best didn't have the same redemptive story Dave Mustaine did. He never became a global superstar or made millions of dollars, yet, in many ways, Best ended up better off than Mustaine. In an interview in 1994, Best said, "I'm happier than I would have been with the Beatles." What the hell? Best explained that the circumstances of his getting kicked out of the Beatles ultimately led him to meet his wife, and then his marriage led him to having children. His values changed. He began to measure his life differently. Fame and glory would have been nice, sure, but he decided that what he already had was more important: a big and loving family, a stable marriage, a simple life. He even still got to play drums, touring Europe and recording albums well into the 2000s. So, what was really lost? Just a lot of attention and adulations, whereas what was gained meant so much more to him. These stories suggest that some values and metrics are better than others. Some lead to good problems that are easily and regularly solved. Others lead to bad problems that are not easily and regularly solved. Let's take a quick break. Let me go to my mod view to see who's in the chat. Alright. Also, let me grab a drink. I'm not drinking my book. This book is not a flask. So relax, okay? Alright, let's continue. Shitty values. There are a handful of common values that create really poor problems for people, problems that can hardly be solved. So let's go over some of them quickly. 1. Pleasure. Pleasure is great, but it's a horrible value to prioritize your life around. Ask any drug addict how his pursuit of pleasure turned out. Ask an adulterer who shattered her family and lost her children whether pleasure ultimately made her happy. Ask a man who almost ate himself to death how pleasure helped him solve his problems. Pleasure is a false god. Research shows that people who focus their energy on superficial pleasures end up more anxious, more emotionally unstable, and more depressed. Pleasure is the most superficial form of life satisfaction, and therefore the easiest to obtain and the easiest to lose. And yet, pleasure is what's marketed to us 24/7. It's what we fixate on. It's what we use to numb and distract ourselves. But pleasure, while necessary in life, it certainly does, in certain doses, isn't by itself sufficient. Pleasure is not the cause of happiness. Rather, it is the effect. If you get the other stuff right, the other values and metrics, then pleasure will naturally occur as a byproduct. 2. Material success. Many people measure their self-worth based on how much money they make or what kind of car they drive or whether their front lawn is greener and prettier than the next door neighbors. Research shows that once one is able to provide for basic physical needs, food, shelter, and so on, the correlation between happiness and worldly success quickly approaches zero. So if you're starving and living on the street in the middle of India, an extra $10,000 a year would affect your happiness a lot. But if you're sitting pretty in the middle class in a developed country, an extra $10,000 per year won't affect anything much, meaning that you're killing yourself working overtime and weekends for basically nothing. The other issue with overvaluing material success is the danger of prioritizing it over other values, such as honesty, nonviolence, and compassion. When people measure themselves not by their behavior but by their status symbols they are able to collect, then not only they are shallow, but they're probably assholes as well. Three, always being right. Our brains are inefficient machines. We constantly make poor assumptions, misjudge probabilities, misremember facts, give in to cognitive biases, and make decisions based on our emotional whims. As humans, we're wrong pretty much constantly. So if your metric for life success is to be right, well, you're going to have a difficult time rationalizing all of the bullshits to yourself. The fact is, people who base their self-worth on being right about everything prevent themselves from learning from their mistakes. They lack the ability to take on new perspectives and empathize with others. They close themselves off to new and important information. It's far more helpful to assume that you're ignorant and don't know a whole lot. This keeps you unattached to superstitious or poorly informed beliefs and promotes a constant state of learning and growth. 4. Staying positive. Then there are those who measure their lives by the ability to be positive about, well, pretty much everything. Lost your job? Great! That's an opportunity to explore your passions. Husband cheated on you with your sister? Well, at least you're learning what you really mean to the people around you. Child dying of throat cancer? At least you don't have to pay for college anymore. While there is something to be said for staying on the sunny side of life, the truth is, sometimes life sucks, and the healthiest thing you can do is admit it. Denying negative emotions leads to experiencing deeper and more prolonged negative emotions and to emotional dysfunction. Constant positivity is a form of avoidance, not a valid solution to life's problems. Problem which, by the way, if you're choosing the right values and metrics, would be invigorating you and motivating you. It's simple, really. Things go wrong. People upsets us. Accidents happen. These things makes us feel like shit, and that's fine. Negative emotions are an unnecessary component of emotional health. To deny that negativity is to perpetuate problems rather than solving them. The trick with negative emotion is to 1. Express them in a socially acceptable and healthy manner, and 2. Express them in a way that aligns with your values. Simple example, a value of mine is non-violence. Therefore, when I get mad at somebody, I express that anger. But I also make a point of not punching them in the face. Radical idea, I know. But the anger is not the problem. Anger is natural. Anger is a part of life. Anger is arguably quite healthy in many situations. Remember, emotions are just feedback. See, it's the punching people in the face that's the problem, not the anger. The anger is merely the messenger for my fist in your face. Don't blame the messenger, blame my face, or your face. When we force ourselves to stay positive at all times, we deny the existence of our life's problems. And when we deny our problems, we rob ourselves of the chance to solve them and generate happiness. Problems add a sense of meaning and importance to our life. Thus, to duck our problems is to lead a meaningless, even if supposedly pleasant, existence. In the long run, completing a marathon makes us happier than eating a chocolate cake. Raising a child makes us happier than beating a video game. Starting a small business with friends while struggling to make ends meet makes us happier than buying a new computer. These activities are stressful, arduous, and often unpleasant. They also require withstanding problems after problem. Yet they are some of the most meaningful moments and joyous things we'll ever do. They involve pain, struggle, even anger and despair. Yet once they're accomplished, we look back and get all misty-eyed telling our grandkids about them. As Freud once said, one day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. This is why these values, pleasure, material success, always being right, staying positive, are poor ideals for a person's life. Some of the greatest moments in one's life are not pleasant, not successful, not known, and not positive. The point is to nail down some good values and metrics. Pleasure and success will naturally emerge as a result. These things are side effects of good values. By themselves, they are empty heights. Empty highs. Sorry. Defining good and bad values. Good values are 1. Reality-based, 2. Socially constructive, and 3. Immediate and controllable. Bad values are superstitious, socially destructive, and not immediate or controllable. Honesty is a good value because it's something you have complete control over. It reflects reality and it benefits others, even if it's sometimes unpleasant. Popularity, on the other hand, is a bad value. If that's your value, and your metric is being the most popular guy or girl at the dance party, much of what happens will be out of your control. You don't know who else will be at the event, and you probably won't know who half of those people are. Second, the value metric isn't based on reality. You may feel popular or unpopular when in fact you have no fucking clue what anybody really thinks about you. Side note, as a rule, people who are terrified of what others think about them are actually terrified of all the shitty things they think about themselves being reflected back at them. Some examples of good, healthy values: honesty, innovation, vulnerability, standing up for oneself, standing up for others, self-respect, curiosity, charity, humility, creativity. Some examples of bad, unhealthy Some example of bad, unhealthy values: dominance through manipulation or violence, indiscriminate fucking, feeling good all the time, always being the center of attention, not being alone, being liked by everybody, being rich for the sake of being rich, sacrificing small animals to the pagan gods. You'll notice that good, healthy values are achieved internally. Something like creativity or humility can be experienced right now. You simply have to orient your mind in a certain way to experience it. These values are immediate and controllable and engage you with the world as it is rather than how you wish it were. Bad values are generally reliant on external events: flying in a private jet, being told you're right all the time, owning a house in the Bahamas, eating cannoli while getting blown by 3 strippers. Bad values, while sometimes fun and pleasurable, lie outside of your control and often require socially destructive or superstitious means to achieve. Values are about prioritizations. Everybody would love a good cannoli or a house in the Bahamas, but question is your priorities. What are the values that you prioritize over everything else, and that therefore influence your decision making more than anything else? Hiro Onoda's highest value was complete loyalty and service to the Japanese Empire. This value, in case you couldn't tell from reading about him, stank worse than a rotten sushi roll. It created really shitty problems for Hiro, namely, he got stuck on a remote island where he lived off bugs and worms for 30 years. Oh, and felt compelled to murder innocent civilians too. So despite the fact that Hiro saw himself as a success, and despite the fact that he lived up to his metrics, I think we can all agree that his life really sucked. None of us would trade shoes with him given the opportunity, nor would we commend his actions. Dave Mustaine achieved great fame and glory and felt like a failure anyway. This is because he's adopted a crappy value based on some arbitrary comparison to the success of others. This value gave him awful problems such as, I need to sell 150 million more records, then everything will be great. And my next tour needs to be nothing but stadiums. Problems he thought he needed to solve in order to be happy. It's no surprise that he wasn't. Dave Mustaine achieved it. Oh wait, I already read that. On the contrary, Pete Best pulled a switcheroo. Despite being depressed and distraught by getting kicked out of the Beatles, as he grew older, he learned to reprioritize what he cared about and was able to measure his life in a new light. Because of this, Best grew into a happy and healthy old man, with an easy life and a great family, things that, ironically, the 4 Beatles would spend decades struggling to achieve or maintain. When we have poor values, that is, poor standard we set for ourselves and others, we are essentially giving fucks about the things that don't matter, things that in fact make our lives worse. But when we choose better values, we are able to divert our fucks to something better, toward things that matter, things that improve the state of our well-being and that generates happiness, pleasure, and success as side effects. This, in a nutshell, is what self-improvement is really about. Prioritizing better values, choosing better things to give a fuck about. Because when you give better fucks, you get better problems. And when you get better problems, you get a better life. The rest of this book is dedicated to 5 counterintuitive values that I believe are the most beneficial values one can adopt. All follow the backward law we talked about earlier, in that they're negative. All require confronting deeper problems rather than avoiding them through highs. These 5 values are both unconventional and uncomfortable, but to me, they are life-changing. The first, which we'll look at in the next chapter, is a radical form of responsibility, taking responsibility for everything that occurs in your life, regardless of who's at fault. The second is uncertainty, the acknowledgement of their own ignorance and the cultivation of constant doubt in your own beliefs. The next is failure, the willingness to discover your own flaws and mistakes so that they may be improved upon. The fourth is rejection, the ability to both say and hear no, thus clearly defining what you will and will not accept in your life. The final value is the contemplation of one's own mortality. This one is crucial, because paying vigilant attention to one's own death is perhaps the only thing capable of helping us keep all of our other values in proper perspective. Sorry. Chapter 5. You are always choosing. Imagine that somebody puts a gun to your head and tells you that you have to run 26.2 miles in under 5 hours, or else he'll kill you and your entire family. That would suck. Now, imagine that you bought nice shoes and running gear, trained religiously for months, and completed your first marathon with all of your closest family and friends cheering you on at the finish line. That could potentially be one of the proudest moments of your life. Exact same 26.2 miles. Exact same person running them. Exact same pain coursing through your exact same legs. But when you choose it freely and prepare for it, it was a glorious and important milestone in your life. When it was forced upon you against your will, it was one of the most terrifying and painful experiences of your life. Often the only difference between the problem being painful and being powerful in the sense that we chose it and that we are responsible for it. If you're miserable in your current situation, chances are it's because you feel like some part of it is outside your control. That there's a problem you have no ability to solve, a problem that was somehow thrust upon you upon your choosing. When we feel that we're choosing our problems, we feel empowered. When we feel that our problems are being forced upon us against our will, we feel victimized and miserable. The choice. William James had problems, really bad problems. Although born into a wealthy and prominent family, from birth, James suffered life-threatening health issues, an eye problem that left him temporarily blinded as a child, a terrible stomach condition that caused excessive vomiting and forced him to adopt an obscure and highly sensitive diet, trouble with his hearing, back spasms so bad that for days at a time he often couldn't sit or stand upright. Due to his health problems, James spent most of his time at home. He didn't have many friends, and he wasn't particularly good at school. Instead, he passed the day painting. That was the only thing he liked, and the only thing he felt particularly good at. Unfortunately, nobody else thought he was good at it. When he grew to adulthood, nobody bought his work, and as the years dragged on, his father, a wealthy businessman, began ridiculing him for his laziness and his lack of talent. Meanwhile, his younger brother, Henry James, went on to become a world-renowned novelist. His sister, Alice James, made a good living as a writer as well. William was the family oddball, the black sheep. In a desperate attempt to salvage the young man's future, James' father used his business connection to get him admitted to Harvard Medical School. It was his last chance, his father told him. If he screwed this up, there was no hope for him. But James never felt at home or at peace at Harvard. Medicine never appealed to him. He spent the whole time feeling like a fake and a fraud. After all, if he couldn't overcome his own problems, how could he ever hope to have the energy to help others with theirs? After touring a psychiatric facility one day, James mused in his diary that he felt he had more in common with the patients than with the doctors. A few years went by, and again, to his father's disapproval, James dropped out of medical school. But rather than deal with the burden of his father's wrath, he he decided to get away. He signed up to join an anthropological expedition to the Amazon rainforest. This was in the 60s, so transcontinental travel was difficult and dangerous. If you ever played the computer game Oregon Trail when you were a kid, it was kind of like that, with the dysentery and drowning oxen and everything. Anyway, James made it all the way to the Amazon, where the real adventure was to begin. Surprisingly, his fragile health held up that whole way. But once he finally made it, on the first day of the expedition, he promptly contracted smallpox and nearly died in the jungle. Then his back spasm returned, painful to the point of making James unable to walk. By this time, he was emaciated and starved from the smallpox, immobilized by his bad back, and left alone in the middle of South Africa, the rest of the expedition having gone on without him. With no clear way to get home, a journey that would take months and likely kill him anyway. But somehow, he eventually made it back to New England, where he was greeted by an even more disappointed father. By this point, the young man wasn't so young anymore, nearly 30 years old, still unemployed, a failure at everything he had attempted, with a body that routinely betrayed him and wasn't likely to ever get better. Despite all the advantage and opportunities he'd been given in life, everything had fallen apart. The only constant in his life seemed to be suffering and disappointment. James fell into the deep depression and began making plans to take his own life. But one night, while reading lectures by the philosopher Charles Peirce, James decided to conduct a little experiment. In his diary, he wrote what he would spend 1 year believing that he was 100% responsible for everything that occurred in his life, no matter what. During this period, he would do everything in his power to change his circumstances, no matter the likelihood of failure. If nothing improved in that year, then it would be apparent that he was truly powerless to the circumstances around him. Then he would take his own life. The punchline? William James went on to become the father of American psychology. His work had been translated into bazillion languages, and he's regarded as one of the most influential intellectuals / philosophers / psychologists of his generations. He would go on to teach at Harvard and would tour much of the United States and Europe giving lectures. He would marry and have 5 children, one of whom, Henry, would become a famous biographer and win a Pulitzer Prize. James would rather refer to his little experiments as his rebirth, and would credit it with everything that he later accomplished in his life. There is a simple realization in which all personal improvement and growth emerges. This is the realization that we, individually, are responsible for everything in our lives, no matter the external circumstances. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always know how we interpret what happens to us, as well as how we respond. Whether we consciously recognize it or not, we are always responsible for our experiences. It's impossible not to be. Choosing to not consciously interpret events in our lives is still an interpretation of the events of our lives. Choosing to not respond to the events in our life is still a response to the events in our lives. Even if you get run over by a clown car and pissed on by a busload of school children, it's still your responsibility to interpret the meaning of the event and choose a response. Whether we like it or not, we are always taking an active role in what's occurring to and within us. We are always interpreting the meaning of every moment and every occurrence. We are always choosing the values by which we live and the metrics by which we measure everything that happens to us. Often the same event can be good or bad, depending on the metric we choose to use. The point is, we are always choosing, whether we recognize it or not. Always. It comes back to how, in reality, there's no such thing as giving a single fuck. It's impossible. We must give a fuck about something. To not give a fuck about anything is still to give a fuck about something. The real question is, what are we choosing to give a fuck about? What values are we choosing to base our actions on? What metrics are we choosing to use to measure our life? Are those good choices, good values, and good metrics? The responsibility or fault fallacy. Years ago, when I was much younger and stupider, I wrote a blog post, and at the end of it, I said something like, and as a great philosopher once said, with great power comes great responsibility. It sounded nice and authoritative. I couldn't remember who had said it, and my Google search had turned up nothing. But I stuck in it there anyway. It fit the post nicely. About 10 minutes later, the first comment came in. I think the great philosopher you're referring to is Uncle Ben from the movie Spider-Man. As another of great philosophers once said, "Go!" With great power comes great responsibility. The last words of Uncle Ben before a thief whom Peter Parker let get away murders him on a sidewalk full of people for absolutely no explicable reason. That great philosopher. Still, we've all heard the quote. It gets repeated a lot, usually ironically and after about 7 beers. It's one of those perfect quotes that sound really intelligent, and yet it's basically just telling you what you already know, even if you've never quite thought about the matter before. With great power comes great responsibility. It is true. But there's a better version of this quote, a version that actually is profound, and all you have to do is switch the noun around. With great responsibility comes great power. The more we choose to accept responsibility in our lives, the more power we will exercise over our lives. Accepting responsibility for our problems is thus the first step of solving them. I once knew a man who was convinced that the reason the woman would date him was because he was too short. He was educated, interesting, and good-looking, a good catch in principle, but he was absolutely convinced that women found him too short to date. And because he felt that he was too short, he didn't often go out and try to meet women. The few times he did, he would home in on the smallest behaviors from any woman that he talked with, what could possibly indicate he wasn't attractive enough for her, and then convince himself that she didn't like him, even if she really did. And as you can imagine, his dating life sucked. What he didn't realize was that he had chosen the value that was hurting him, height. Women, he assumed, are attracted only to height. He was screwed no matter what he did. This choice of value was disempowering. It gave this man a really crappy problem. Not being tall enough in the world meant, in his view, for tall people. There are far fewer values that he could have adopted in his dating life. I want to date only women who like me for who I am. Might have been a nice place to start, a metric that assesses the values of honesty and acceptance. But he did not choose these values. He likely wasn't even aware that he was choosing his value, or could do so. He thought he didn't realize it. He was responsible for his own problems. Okay, there's going to be an ad, so we're gonna wait for 30 seconds. In the meantime, let's chat. Wait, that's even more wrong. So I see 2 people watching on YouTube. How you guys doing? If you can hear me, say whoa. Say whoa. Say whoa. Say whoa. Say whoa. People on YouTube say whoa. Alright, the ad is 1 minute and it is 30 seconds. Alright, let's continue. Despite that responsibility, he went on complaining. But I don't dang it, the freaking ad just started. Waiting for 30 seconds. Ad. Alright, welcome back. Alright, let's continue with the book. Despite that responsibility, he went on complaining, but I don't have a choice. He would tell the bartender, there's nothing I can do. Women are superficial and vain and will never like me. Yes, it's every single woman's fault for not liking a self-pitying shallow guy with shitty values, obviously. A lot of people hesitate to take responsibility for their problems because they believe that to be responsible for your problems is to also be at fault for your problems. Responsibility and fault often appear together in our culture, but they're not the same thing. If I hit you with my car, I am both at fault and likely legally responsible to compensate you in some way. Even if hitting you with my car was an accident, I am still responsible. This is the way fault works in our society. If you fuck up, you're on the hook for making it right, and it should be that way. But there are also problems that we aren't at fault for, yet we are still responsible for them. For example, if you woke up one day and there was a newborn baby on your doorstep, it would not be your fault that the baby had been put there, but the baby would now be your responsibility. You would have to choose what to do, and whether you ended up choosing keeping it, getting rid of it, ignoring it, feeding it to a pit bull, there would be problems associated with your choice, and you would be responsible for those as well. Judges don't get to choose their cases. When a case goes to court, the judge assigned to it did not commit the crime, was not a witness to the crime, and was not affected by the crime, but he or she is still responsible for the crime. The judge must then choose the consequences. He or she must identify the metric against which the crime will be measured and make sure that the chosen metric is carried out. We are responsible for experiences that aren't our fault all the time. This is part of life. Here's one way to think about the distinction between the two concepts. Fault is past tense. Responsibility is present tense. Fault results from the choices that have already been made. Responsibility results from the choices you're currently making every second of every day. You are choosing to read this. You are choosing to think about the concepts. You are choosing to accept or reject the concepts. It may be my fault that you think my ideas are lame, but you are responsible for coming to your own conclusions. It's not your fault that I chose to write this sentence, but you are still responsible for choosing to read it, or not. There's a difference between blaming someone else for your situation and that person's actually being responsible for your situations. Nobody else is ever responsible for your situation but you. Many people may be to blame for your unhappiness, but nobody is ever responsible for your unhappiness but you. This is because you always get to choose how to see things, how you react to things, how you value things. You always get to choose the metric by which to measure your experiences. My first girlfriend dumped me in a spectacular fashion. She was cheating on me with her teacher. It was awesome. And by awesome, I mean it felt like getting punched in the stomach about 253 times. To make things worse, when I confronted her about it, she promptly left me for him. 3 years together, down the toilet, just like that. I was miserable for months afterwards. That was to be expected. But I also held her responsible for my misery, which, take it from me, didn't get me very far. It just made the misery worse. See, I couldn't control her. No matter how many times I called her, or screamed at her, or begged her to take me back, or made surprise visits to her place, or did other creepy and irrational ex-boyfriend things, I could never control her emotions or her actions. Ultimately, while she was to blame for how I felt, she was never responsible for how I felt. I was. At some point, after enough tears and alcohol, my thinking began to shift and I began to understand that although she had done something horrible to me and she could be blamed for that, it was now my own responsibility to make myself happy again. She was never going to pop up and fix things for me. I had to fix them for myself. When I took that approach, a few things happened. First, I began to improve myself. I started exercising and spending more time with my friends, whom I had been neglecting. I started deliberately meeting new people. I took a big study abroad trip and did some volunteer work, and slowly I started to feel better. I still resented my ex for what she had done, but at least now I was taking responsibility for my own emotions. And by doing so, I was choosing better values. Values aimed at taking care of myself, learning to feel better about myself rather than aim at getting her to fix what she had broken. By the way, this whole holding her responsible for my emotion thing is probably part of why she left in the first place. More on that in a couple of chapters. Then, about a year later, something funny began to happen. As I looked back on our relationship, I started to notice these problems I had never noticed before. Problems that I was to blame for and that I could have done something to solve. I realized that it was likely that I hadn't been a great boyfriend and that people don't just magically cheat on somebody they've been with unless they are unhappy for some reason. I'm not saying that this excused what my ex did, not at all. But recognizing my mistakes helped me to realize that I perhaps hadn't been the innocent victim I believed myself to be. That I had a role to play in enabling the shitty relationship to continue for as long as it did. After all, people who date each other tend to have similar values, and if I dated someone with shitty values for that long, what did that say about me and my values? I learned the hard way that if people in your relationships are selfish and doing horrible things, it's likely you are too, and you just don't realize it. In hindsight, I was able to look back and see warning signs of my ex-girlfriend's character. signs I had chosen to ignore or brush off when I was with her. That was my fault. I could look back and see that I hadn't exactly been the boyfriend of the year to her either. In fact, I had often been cold and arrogant towards her. Other times, I took her for granted and blew her off and hurt her. These things were my fault too. Did my mistake justify her mistake? No, but still, I took on the responsibility of never making those same mistakes again, and never overlooking the same signs again, to help guarantee that I will never suffer the same consequences again. I took on the responsibility of striving to make my future relationships with women that much better, and I'm happy to report that I have. No more cheating girlfriends leaving me, no more 253 stomach punches. I took responsibility for my problems and improved upon them. I took responsibility for my role in that unhealthy relationship and improved upon it with later relationships. And you know what? My ex leaving me, while one of the most painful experiences I have ever had, was also one of the most important and influential experiences of my life. I credit it with inspiring and a significant amount of personal growth. I learned more from that single problem than dozens of my successes combined. We all love to take responsibility for success and happiness. Hell, we often fight over who gets to be responsible for our success and happiness. But taking responsibility for our problems is far more important, because that's where real learning comes from. That's where real life improvement comes from. To simply blame others is only to hurt yourself. Responding to tragedy. But what about really awful events? A lot of people can get on board with taking responsibility for work-related problems and maybe watching too much TV when they should really be playing with their kids or being productive. But when it comes to horrible tragedies, they pull the emergency cord on the responsibility train and get off when it stops. Some things just feel too painful for them to own up to. But think about it. The intensity of the event doesn't change the underlying truth. If you get robbed, say, you're obviously not at fault for being robbed. No one would ever choose to go through that. But as with the baby on your doorstep, you are immediately thrust into responsibility for a life and death situation. Do you fight back? Do you panic? Do you freeze up? Do you tell the police? Do you try to forget it and pretend it never happened? These are all choices and reactions you're responsible for making or rejecting. You didn't choose the robbery, but it's still your responsibility to manage the emotional and the psychological and legal fallout of the experience. In 2008, the Taliban took control of the Swat Valley, a remote part of northeastern Pakistan. They quickly implemented their Muslim extremist agenda. No television, no films, no women outside the house with a male escort, no girls attending school. By 2009, an 11-year-old Pakistani girl named Malala Yousafzai had begun to speak out against the school ban. She continued to attend her local school, risking both her and her father's lives. She also attended conferences in nearby cities. She wrote online, "How dare the Taliban take away my right for education?" In 2012, at the age of 14, she was shot in the face as she rode the bus home from school one day. A masked Taliban soldier armed with a rifle boarded the bus and asks, "Who is Malala? Tell me, or I will shoot everyone here." Malala identified herself, an amazing choice in and of itself, and the man shot her in the head in front of all other passengers. Malala went into a coma and almost died. The Taliban stated publicly that if she somehow survived the attempt, they would kill both her and her father. Today, Malala is still alive. She still speaks out against violence and oppression towards women in Muslim countries, now as a best-selling author. In 2014, she received the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts. It would seem that being shot in the face only gave her a larger audience and more courage than before. It would have been easy for her to lie down and say, "I can't do anything," or "I have no choice." That, ironically, would still have been her choice, but she chose the opposite. A few years ago, I had written about some of the ideas in this chapter on my blog, and a man left a comment. He said that I was shallow and superficial, adding that I had no real understanding of life's problems or human responsibility. He said that his son had recently died in a car accident. He accused me for not knowing what true pain was and said that I was an asshole for suggesting that he himself was responsible for the pain he felt over his son's death. This man had obviously suffered pain much greater than most people ever have to confront in their lives. He didn't choose for his son to die, nor was it his fault that his son died. The responsibility for coping with that loss was given to him, even though it was clearly and understandably unwanted. But despite all that, he was still responsible for his own emotions, beliefs, and actions. How he reacted to his son's death was his own choice. Pain of one sort or another is inevitable for all of us, but we get to choose what it means to and for us. Even in claiming that he had no choice in the matter and simply wanted his son back, he was making a choice, one of many ways he could have chosen to use that pain. Of course, I didn't say any of this to him. I was too busy being horrified and thinking that yes, perhaps I was in a way over my head and had no idea what the fuck I was talking about. That's a hazard that comes with my line of work, a problem that I choose, and a problem that I was responsible for dealing with. At first, I felt awful, but then after a few minutes, I began to get angry. His objection had little to do with what I was actually saying, I told myself. And what the hell, just because I don't have a kid who died, doesn't mean I haven't experienced terrible pain myself. But then I actually applied my own advice. I chose my problems. I chose my problem. I could get mad at this man and argue with him, try to outpain him with my own pain, which would have just make us both look stupid and insensitive. Or I could choose a better problem, working on practicing patience, understanding my readers better, and keeping that man in mind every time I wrote about pain and trauma from then on. And that's what I've tried to do. I replied simply that I was sorry for his loss and left it at that. What else can you say? Genetics and the hands were dealt. In 2013, the BBC rounded up half a dozen teenagers with obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, and followed them as they attended intensive therapies to help them overcome their unwanted thoughts and repetitive behaviors. There was Imogen, a 17-year-old girl who had a compulsive need to tap every surface she walked past. If she failed to do so, she was flooded with horrible thoughts about her family dying. There was Josh, who needed to do everything with both sides of his body. Shake a person's hand with both his right and his left hand, eat his food with each hand, step through a doorway with both feet, and so on. If he didn't equalize his two sides, he suffered from severe panic attacks. And then there was Jack, a classic germaphobe who refused to leave his house without wearing gloves, boiled all his water before drinking it, and refused to eat food not clean and prepared himself. OCD is a terrible neurological and genetic disorder that cannot be cured. At best, it can be managed, and as we'll see, managing the disorder comes down to managing one's values. The first thing the psychiatrists on this project do is tell the kids that they're to accept the imperfection of their compulsive desires. What that means, as one example, is that when Imogen becomes flooded with horrible thoughts of her family dying, she is to accept that her family may actually die and that there's nothing she can do about it. Simply put, she is told that what happens to her is not her fault. Josh is forced to accept that over the long term, equalizing all of his behaviors to make them symmetrical is actually destroying his life more than occasional panic attacks would. And Jack is reminded that no matter what he does, germs are always present and always infecting him. The goal is to get the kids to recognize that their values are not rational, that in fact their values are not even theirs, but rather are the disorders, and that by fulfilling these irrational values, they are actually harming their ability to function in life. Next step is to encourage the kids to choose a value that is more important than their OCD value and to focus on that. For Josh, it's the possibility of not having to hide his disorders from his friends and family all the time. The prospect of having a normal, functioning social life. For Imogen, it's the idea of taking control over her own thoughts and feelings and being happy again. And for Jack, it's the ability to leave his house for long periods of time without suffering traumatic episodes. With these new values held front and center in their minds, the teenagers set out on intensive desensitization exercises that force them to live out their new values. Panic attacks ensue. Tears are shed. Jack punches an array of inanimate objects and then immediately washes his hands. But by the end of the documentary, major progress had been made. Imogen no longer needs to tap every surface she comes across. She says, there are still monsters in the back of my mind, and there probably always will be, but they're getting quieter now. Josh is able to go periods of 25 to 30 minutes without equalizing his behaviors between both sides of his body. And Jack, who makes perhaps the most improvement, is actually able to go out to restaurants and drink out of bottles and glasses without washing them first. Jack sums up well what he learned. I didn't choose this life. I didn't choose this horrible, horrible condition, but I get to choose how to live with it. I have to choose how to live with it. A lot of people treat being born with disadvantage, whether OCD or small stature or something very different, as though they were screwed out of something highly valuable. They feel that there's nothing they can do about it, so they avoid responsibility for their situation. They figure, I didn't choose my crappy genetics, so it's not my fault if things go wrong. And it's true, it's not their fault, but it's still their responsibility. Back in college, I had a bit of a delusional fantasy of becoming a professional poker player. I won money and everything, and it was fun. But after almost a year of serious play, I quit. The lifestyle of staying up all night staring at a computer screen, winning thousands of dollars one day and then losing most of it in the next, wasn't for me. And it wasn't exactly the most healthy or emotionally stable means of earning a living. But my time playing poker had a surprisingly profound influence on the way I see life. The beauty of poker is that while luck is always involved, luck doesn't dictate the long-term results of the game. A person can get dealt terrible cards and win someone who has dealt greater cards. Sure, the person who gets dealt great cards had a higher likelihood of winning the hand, but ultimately the winner is determined by, yup, you guessed it, the choices each player makes throughout the play. I see life in the same terms. We all get dealt cards. Some of us get better cards than the other. And while it's easy to get hung up on our cards and feel we got screwed over, the real game lies in the choices we make with those cards, the risk we decided to take, and the consequences we chose to live with. People who consistently make the best choices in the situations they're given are the ones who eventually come out ahead in poker, just as in life. And it's not necessarily the people with the best cards. There are those who suffer psychologically and emotionally from neurological and or genetic deficiencies. But this changes nothing. Sure, they inherited a bad hand and are not to blame. No more than the short guy wanted to get a date is to blame for being short, or the person who get robbed is to blame for being robbed. But it's still their responsibility, whether they chose to seek psychiatric treatment, undergo therapy, or do nothing. The choice is ultimately theirs to make. There are those who suffer through bad childhoods. There are those who are abused and violated and screwed over physically, emotionally, and financially. They are not to blame for their problems and their hindrances, but they are still responsible, always responsible, to move on despite their problems and to make the best choices they can, given their circumstances. And let's be honest here, if you're to add up all of the people who have some psychiatric disorder, struggle with depression or suicidal thoughts, have been subjected or neglected or abused, have dealt with tragedy or death of a loved one, and have survived serious health issues, accident, or trauma, if you were to run up all those people and put them in the room, well, you probably had to run up everyone because nobody makes it through life without collecting a few scars on the way out. Sure, some people get saddled with worse problems than others, and some people are legitimately victimized in horrible ways, but as much as this may upset us or disturb us, it ultimately changes nothing about the responsibility equation of our individual situation. Victimhood check. The responsibility fault fallacy allows people to pass off the responsibility for solving their problems to others. This ability to affiliate responsibility through blame gives people a temporary high and a feeling of moral righteousness. Unfortunately, one side effect of the internet and social media is that it's become easier than ever to push responsibility for even the tiniest of infraction onto some other group or person. In fact, this kind of public blame-shame game has become popular in certain crowds. It's even seen as cool. The public sharing of injustices garners far more attention and emotional outpouring than most other events on social media, rewarding people who are able to perpetually feel victimized with ever-growing amounts of attention and sympathy. Victimhood chic is a style of both the right and the left today among both the rich and the poor. In fact, this may be the first time in human history that every single demographic group has felt unfairly victimized simultaneously. And they're all riding the highs of the moral indignation that comes along with it. Right now, anyone who is offended about anything, whether it's the fact that a book about racism was assigned in university class, or that Christmas trees were banned at the local mall, or the fact that taxes were raised 0.5% on investment funds, feels as though they're being oppressed in some way and therefore deserve to be outraged and to have certain amounts of attention. The current media environment both encourages and perpetuates these reactions because, after all, it's good for business. The writer and media commentator Ryan Holiday refers to this as outrage porn. Rather than report on real stories and real issues, the media find it much easier and more profitable to find something mildly offensive, broadcast it to a wide audience, generate outrage, and then broadcast that outrage back across the population in a way that outrage yet another part of the population. This triggers a kind of echo of bullshitting pinging back and forth between two imaginary sides, meanwhile distracting everyone from the real societal problems. It's no wonder we're more politically polarized than ever before. The biggest problem with victimhood chic is that it sucks attention away from actual victims. It's like the boy who cried wolf. The more people there are who proclaim themselves victims over tiny infractions, the harder it becomes to see who the real victims actually are. People get addicted to feeling offended all the time because it gives them a high. Being self-righteous and morally superior feels good. As political cartoonist Tim Crater put in a New York Times op-ed, outrage is like a lot of other things that feel good but over time devours us from the inside out. And it's even more insidious than most vices because we don't even consciously acknowledge that it's pleasure. But part of living in a democracy and free society is that we all have to deal with views and people we don't necessarily like. That's simply the price we pay. You could even say that it's the whole point of the system. And it seems more and more people are forgetting that. We should pick our battles carefully, while simultaneously attempting to empathize a bit with the so-called enemy. We should approach the news and media with a healthy dose of skepticism and avoid painting those who disagree with us with a broad brush. We should prioritize values of being honest, fostering transparency, and welcoming doubt over the values of being right, feeling good, and getting revenge. These democratic values are harder to maintain amidst the constant noise of a networked world, but we must accept the responsibility and nurture them regardless. The future stability of our political system may depend on it. There is no how. A lot of people might hear all of this and then say something like, okay, but how? I get that my value sucks and that I avoid responsibility for all of my problems and that I'm entitled little shit who thinks the world should revolve around me and every inconvenience I experience, but how do I change? And to this I say in my best Yoda impression, do not. There is no how. You are already choosing in every moment of every day what to give a fuck about, so change is as simple as choosing to give a fuck about something else. It really is that simple. It's just not easy. It's not easy because you're going to feel like a loser, a fraud, a dumbass at first. You're going to be nervous. You're going to be freaked out. You may get pissed off at your wife or your friends or your father in the process. These are all side effects of changing your values, of changing the fucks you're giving, but they are inevitable. It's simple, but really, really hard. Let's look at some of the side effects. You're going to feel uncertain, I guarantee it. Should I really give this up? Is this the right thing to do? Giving up a value you've depended on for years is going to feel disorienting, as if you don't really know right from wrong anymore. This is hard, but it's personal. But it's normal. Next, you'll feel like a failure. You spend half of your life measuring yourself by that old value. So when you change your priorities, change your metrics, and stop behaving in the same way, you'll fail to meet that old trusted metric and thus immediately feel like some sort of fraud or nobody. This is also normal and also uncomfortable. And certainly, you will weather rejections. Many of the relationships in your life were built around the values you've been keeping. So the moment you change those values, the moment you decide that studying is more important than partying, that getting married and having a family is more important than rampant sex, and working a job you believe in is more important than money, your turnaround will reverberate out through your relationships, and many of them will blow up in your face. This too is normal, and this too will be uncomfortable. These are necessary, though painful, side effects of choosing to place your fuck elsewhere, in a place far more important and more worthy of your energies. As you reassess your values, you will be met with internal and external resistance along the way. More than anything, you will feel uncertain. You will wonder if what you're doing is wrong. But, as we'll see, this is a good thing. End of chapter 5. Alright, so I guess that's pretty much it for tonight's ASMR book club. Oh wait. Yeah, so thank you so much guys for watching. I hope that you enjoyed that. If you like what you see, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing or follow me on Twitch. Okay, so let's try to find who we can raid. Ooh, Steph is playing Final Fantasy 14. Let's raid her. Yeah, I was wondering why Steph isn't on YouTube. Yeah, so let's do our usual outro. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing or follow me on Twitch. I stream at least once a week. I play video games, I translate manga, and I read books. I guess this is now a new thing. What else? If you want to support me, please consider leaving a donation onto my coffee page. I'm probably gonna make a compilation of this book once I'm done with every chapter, and I'll probably post the compilation over at my coffee. What else? If you want to support me on a monthly basis, I also have a Patreon over at patreon.com/Natalie, where you can get 1 week early access to all of my content, such as manga translation, behind the scenes stuff, and also cool Discord role. Speaking of which, special shoutouts to all of my Patreons over at patreon.com. And speaking of, join my Discord, buy my merch. Alright, we are raiding Staff.